Hello, and welcome to the Morgan Latif podcast series, this time focusing on diversity and inclusion. This week, my guest is Sari Brodi. Sari brings over 25 years in the equality, diversity, and inclusion space and is a real thought leader. She's a member of the World Economic Forum, Global Future Council, and most notably was the global head of equality, diversity, and inclusion for IKEA and spearheaded the company's transformation into a leader in equality. She now is a coach and supports leaders on their transformation to being more inclusive leaders who in turn shape a more inclusive culture. And in this episode, we have a fascinating discussion going through her career, dissecting a little bit about the journey that has occurred over the last 25 years for her and how that has shaped her perspective and how she sees the D&I space overall. She also gives us practical examples that not only leaders, but all of us can take to form a more inclusive culture. And through that, hopefully find value in our own professional and personal lives. So as always, I hope you find it of value. Sari, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me.
So as always, I like to start our show with really asking about the origin story with each guest. And with this series in particular, wanted to really understand your journey into the D&I space and what, essentially what brought you into it and then what really kept you there and what made it your passion.
Yeah, I've been working in the field of equality, diversity, and inclusion for over 25 years. And I would say my passion for the topic started very early on in my life. I grew up in Israel, first generation Israeli to parents who fled Iraq in the 50s. And Israel is a melting pot, people from all over the world. It's a very young country. And naturally, when people of different backgrounds and cultural heritage come together, there will be biases and there will be stereotypes, at least at the beginning. So already in middle school, I experienced some of those biases. I was part of an integration program where my school was bused into middle school in the north part of the city. And of course, the intention was to bridge the gaps and to intermingle the different neighborhoods that also represented different cultural heritage. And all students participating in the program actually had to undergo some exams before entering to be able to place them in the different levels. Well, as the school year started, the results have yet to arrive. And so the administration arbitrarily decided that all the kids from my school will be in all of the subject matters in the lowest level. And kids from other schools were placed in higher level. A few of my friends and I actually participated in gifted program during elementary school. So we were quite high level in those subject matters. So we went to the principal and actually explained this and asked to be moved up. And we were told that we can't, that we have to wait for the exams. And I would say this was my first memory fighting for fairness and equality. I left the classroom, I went to the vice principal office, and I really insisted on them being fair with me. I was actually quite small, 7th grade, but very, very stubborn and persistent. And a few days of a lot of heartache and a lot of pain and crying back and forth from the classroom to the vice principal office, involving my parents as well. Eventually, they let me move. And of course, a month later, when the results arrived, they had said, yeah, it was confirmed. But I would say throughout the high school, there were a lot of incidents like this that really showed me that I'm being judged based on the neighborhood, my cultural heritage, and not necessarily based on my ability. If I fast forward actually to after I graduated and I was 18 years old in Israel, military is mandatory. And it's also known as a real good melting pot. People are all wearing the same uniform. You're being tested for your ability and placed in areas or in units based on what you have been proven. So after officers class and my first placement, I was asked to be the first human resource woman officer in the paratrooper division. And honestly, I was quite a feminist. And so for me, it was what an opportunity to break those gender barriers, to prove my ability, and to show men and women don't differ intellectually. Well, only to find out that systemically they were making a lot of steps towards equality. But the people, the soldiers, their officers, the culture was very much stuck in the gender roles. And so quite fast, I realized if I really want to be successful and enjoy my military experience, I need to fit in. I cannot afford to stick out and to be the only woman with the group. So I went and asked special permission to get men's uniform. I behaved like a man. I spoke like a man, which was not a very flattering language, but my whole effort was to put on a facade, to put away my femininity and to really just fit in as part of the rest. And that was hard work. And it was also very unsatisfying for a woman who believed in gender equality. And so when my next promotion came and I was asked to sign more years in the military, I decided, I'm done. I'm done pretending. I'm gonna quit and continue with my life. And so I would say a lot of different experiences in life brought me to this. And then when I left the army, I went to university. And in university, I did my bachelor's and master's in Israel and focused on organizational and social psychology with a lot of emphasis on people's behavior in organization. What makes people behave in a certain way and what drive groups to behave in a certain way. And after my master's was done, I worked in Israel with newcomers to Israel. It was a huge coming from Ethiopia and Russia, two extremely different cultures.
Yeah, I can imagine.
That was an awakening to cultural diversity. That was a fantastic and humbling experience. And so when I came to the US, I continued. I did my doctorate in industrial psychology. And here I really focused on cultural diversity in the workplace. And from then on, I would say, even starting with my internship, this is the area that I really wanted to keep learning, enhance my knowledge, but also enhance the knowledge of others in the world. And not only focus on the fact that we are different from each other, but we also bring our differences, and that's a good thing. And already then, not using the word inclusion, because that was not part of my language then, but really using the whole issue of sense of belonging, letting people be who they are and let them shine with their uniqueness rather than asking them to fit in.
Really interesting. And you started early again in identifying that was a path for you. And it's interesting how that it seems like it was an innate characteristic, right? When you were that young to sort of understand the principle of equality and then how that transcended throughout your life, really. I mean, out of curiosity, was there out of the examples you gave, because again, from school, military, you've been in the corporate world, now you're a coach, have each of those experiences impacted you in equal measure, or do you think there's one more than the other that really influenced the approach that you now have or the view that you take on D&I?
Well, I would say it's kind of an accumulative process. So starting from very young age, I've experienced this. I've experienced it also at home. I'm one of 8 children of a family. So already there fighting for equality, so to speak, with my parents. And I've had some amazing experiences of experiencing inclusion and equality, and some not so good ones that brought me to realizing I have to stand up for it and I have to fight for it. I would say I have one experience standing out to me at work. I started in IKEA as a consultant. And really 20 years ago, I have introduced diversity to IKEA's management team. I was a consultant, and for 2 years, we did a roadshow. We went from one region of the world to another, meeting with the top managers and just talking to them about the concept of diversity and the concept of self-awareness of your own biases, and how do you actually let people be who they are and not judge them based on who you are. This ethnocentricity, putting yourself in the center and saying, is it better or is it worse? How about all differences are just that? They're just differences, and they can be equally measured. So I've done that. And then 2 years later, I joined as the US Leadership and Diversity Manager. And if I say one experience sticks out in my mind that really brought me to the realization of where are people's awareness, I was in one of our stores, one of IKEA's stores, and the whole management team, also employees, were there in a room. We did a whole day awareness training, and also setting goals to where do we take diversity moving forward. And one guy in the audience raises his hand, his hand that was actually featuring a swastika tattoo.
Wow.
And he's raising his hand and he said, excuse me, first of all, you being here as a woman speaking to us, your place is actually in the kitchen. This is what you are meant to do, to bring children to the world and to be in the kitchen. And so for you to ask us to be aware of our stereotypes, to set goals, to improve ourselves, who do you think yourself to be? All of this is happening while I am noticing actually the swastika tattoo. So having to get hold of myself and really compose myself, I was asking him, can you please tell me, what is this tattoo on your arm? And he explains that, yeah, sure, that's a swastika. I do think there are differences between people, and I do support the fact that Jews are not equal. And he went on to talk about other cultures, putting people down, talking about the whole problem with the concept of diversity and of inclusion. And there was utter silence in the room. I think everybody was in shock. People were ashamed and embarrassed. And I was completely in shock. I've not encountered something so direct, so racist, I would say, in my face. And after composing myself, I had asked the people in the room if they want to say something in response. And of course, people were shocked, and they were really trying to put him in his place and to explain how inappropriate it was. And I had to stop the meeting then and take him out of the room. And we called the human resource of the unit, and he was brought to the human resource manager, a discussion with the management team, and it ended up not so good for him, but really good for the company. To show that not only do we focus on diversity, but we also focus on anti-discrimination. Behaviors that undermine our ability and our efforts to make people feel that they are being treated equally. And that stood out for me. And from that moment, I was quite ready. I was more aware that there are people out there with different levels of acceptance, different level of tolerance. And at that point, people asked me, so what about inclusion? If you're focusing on inclusion, and inclusion means everybody has the right to express themselves, whether they are pro or anti-diversity, how do you explain that? And it took me a while, and I read a lot of research and a lot of studies And I came to the acceptance and the realization that inclusion actually doesn't mean that everybody is included. Inclusion means that you can be who you are, and we accept and respect and value you. But if your whole concept of the world is about undermining others, excluding others, and being racist, chauvinist, whatever your anti is, then that is not a part that is included, so to speak. And from that moment on, this is how I presented inclusion all the time. Inclusion is all of us have the right to be who we are, and we all contribute with our uniqueness. But inclusion doesn't mean we have the right to undermine others, to discriminate against them, and to exclude them. That became very clear in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a visceral example of being confronted with that, of what that means, right? Because it said inclusion sometimes means that we have to accept everybody's opinions. So it was, again, an amazing example of that in the real world. And again, in these large organizations, you're always going to have a spectrum of different opinions, right? And that's actually one of the things that I was thinking of. I mean, obviously, hopefully 99% of the people would agree that that's an important behavior, but there is a spectrum of opinions and not everybody is on the extreme right or the extreme left. And when it comes to inclusion, then what is your suggestion to leaders to be able to navigate all those different opinions and the different, again, that spectrum of how people see the world, be it through their race, their gender, their ethnicity, their sexuality? Like, how do leaders navigate that so that they don't feel like they are excluding anybody, and how can they practice especially in these large organizations where you're dealing with global workforces?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say if I can take just a few minutes just to define the difference between diversity and inclusion, because when we talk about diversity, it really is about our identity, the differences that we bring with us, our background, and that includes our gender, both the visual and not so visual. So it's our gender, and it's our sexual orientation and sexual identity, it's our age, it's our physical ability, it's our religion, and it's also all of our capabilities and skills and education, everything that we bring with us, all of our background. That is a given. This is what we have. And I always recommend for leaders, if you really want to be successful, you want as many differences in your team as possible, because this is what makes the team great. But it will not be successful as a team if you didn't actually work on the inclusion component. So like I said, if you bring all of those differences, but the culture is not there to receive them and embrace them, then it's going to be a very unhappy experience for people who are different from the majority. So this is where inclusion comes to place, and leaders, as well as individuals in the organization, have a big role to play. It's how do we make sure that everybody feels that they are valued? And here I would say, just like I explained what inclusion is before, is whether I agree with your political affiliation, religion affiliation, your sexual identity, sexual orientation, whatever it is, we can coexist as long as none of us undermines the others and does this one-upmanship that one is better than other. And for that, after all of those years working with inclusion, I put together like what can help me shape an inclusive culture. And I would say there are several components. Maybe I can mention them.
Yeah, for sure.
And if you want, I can go a little bit more into detail. But for me, it starts with awareness. And then it goes into curiosity and learning. It goes into caring and empathy. Then it's about collaboration, communication, and then it's allyship. So if I take a few minutes about each component, when we start about awareness, really quickly, it's if I am not aware of myself, of the impact that my behavior has on my team and on the culture, then I cannot start by bringing different people together. So it's not only awareness of my unconscious bias and how it impacts my interaction with others, but it's in awareness of my entire behavior. How am I interacting with other women, with other men, with people who look different, have a different skin color, have a different body shape, different religion with religion symbols. So how am I interacting? And am I more timid, more forthcoming, etc.? So that's the first component of awareness. And I would say every leader should do some work about their unconscious bias and then explore what is it they can do to minimize it. And I have a whole section about it, but I won't go into it. But for me, self-awareness is the number one. And then it's about collaboration. In today's world, and where we are and the way we are moving forward, no one person holds all the knowledge and all the wisdom. And we also know that when different people come together, they challenge each other in completely different ways than if it's people who understand each other and speak the same language and complete each other's sentence. It's more comfortable, but we all think alike. So we don't actually challenge and push each other. And I would say collaboration in the sense of bring people who are different and give them a voice. Don't ask them to fit in, so to speak. And I do quote unquote, because every culture likes this notion of, well, you fit into our culture. It sounds fantastic, but does fit in means I have to lose who I am? Because if so, then why are you bringing people who are different from each other? So collaboration with people who are different, but letting them maintain their differences. That's when we start shining. And then another component is curiosity and learning. We know we are different from each other. So how about we take life as an opportunity for lifelong learning? And for me, that's how it is. When I work with people who are different, I constantly ask them questions. I explore about their differences. For example, for me, when I work with people who are from different religion, I always ask them in order to not have assumption and stereotypes. We had a woman who worked with us who was in the office and we didn't know her religion because she was not wearing religious symbols. But then one day she showed up with a veil, asking men not to touch her, asking to be in a room if she's with a man, either the door open or another woman. And the rumors started that she's being controlled, she's being put down, that the Muslim religion actually has this hierarchy. And for me, it was more about curiosity. Okay, let's stop the rumor and let's increase our learning. So of course I approached her and I said, tell me a little bit about this veil. Was it your choice? What does it mean? And why do you choose to take it on suddenly? And the learning that I got out of it was enlightening. It was completely her choice, and it's not about putting it down. And we learned so much that we actually decided to do a brown bag lunch, that people come together and we learn about each other's religion. So curiosity and learning is about us developing ourselves when we listen to our colleagues tell us about their differences.
Interesting. And I want to go back to the first point a little bit, because you did say you had some advice for leaders. And when you talk about awareness about these unconscious biases, it's very, I think it's one of those things that it's great to say, but it's very difficult to do, right? Because they're unconscious, right? And we're all, doesn't matter who you are, you're prone to the same biases. Doesn't matter if you're a PhD in psychology or, it doesn't, you're prone to the same biases. And actually, if we think about the modern world, modern office life, for example, we value speed and efficiency. And actually, we value leaders who are instinctive and can make decisions quickly. And actually taking a step back to think about a decision can sometimes be misconstrued as indecisiveness. And leaders and people can see that as maybe not a strength in leaders. So again, what was your advice when you talk about you do have things for us to be more aware of that unconscious bias? What do you suggest for leaders when we talk about that?
Yeah, that is a really, really good question, because of course biases happen in the first 10 seconds that we are interacting with a person, because we see them and then we hear their voice and we assume based on the accent. We actually assume intelligence based on accent. We don't only assume cultural differences. And so it's really hard for us to do that, especially when we need to be decisive. And I would say many of our mistakes are done because of our biases. Because sometimes I have the halo effect, which is the positive bias. I see a person who is attractive and I assume intelligence. I see a person who has an English accent, wouldn't you know it? And it's known that the British accent is immediate assumption is that they have a higher level of intelligence than other people. And so how do we stop these both positive and negative stereotypes from happening? I would say, even in this very quick world, we need to pause. We need to pause. And I have a fantastic experience. I was interviewed as a diversity manager in IKEA US. I was interviewing somebody in my team. I was the talent manager, and I was hiring somebody to be under me for a succession manager. And in the resume, the person wrote that he's a pastor. So me not knowing, I had all kinds of assumptions about what would a pastor look like. I had an assumption about would they accept people of different sexual orientations and identity? Would they treat women and men equally? Would they accept other religion? And I was actually quite nervous about it. But as a diversity manager, I had to invite him to an interview. And I really asked myself to postpone my assumptions. So here it is. The guy comes into the room. I booked this room and he knocks on the door. Now this guy is full of facial piercing, full of tattoos everywhere. And he enters the room and he's like, hello. And I said, excuse me, maybe you are for an interview, but not for my interview, because it's pretty clear that you are not my interviewee. I'm thinking a pastor will come dressed in a certain way and look in a certain way. And he's like, I'm pretty sure I'm here to see you, Sari. And it took me a minute and I asked him for his name and we confirmed it. And for me, the way to break my biases is immediate confession. Okay, I just have to let you know. I was sure you would look in a certain way and you look completely differently. And I'm also concerned about those areas that I mentioned before. So I want to put it on the table and I want to explore it with you because I know it's my biases, but I need to check them. I need to check my assumption. And that was a fantastic interview. And I ended up hiring the person. But for me, the learning is that we need to take a pause and to say to ourselves, hold on. I'm making here assumptions that may or may not be true. And how do I know that? Because immediately the person enters the room or starts talking, or if it's on Zoom, it's the video, or on the phone, I hear their tone of voice and the accent, and I guess their age and their gender and their culture. I guess all of those things, including their intelligence and capacity. So for me to say, is it possible that I know so much from the first hello that this person say? So you take a pause and you actually explore what's going on. And you really ask yourself those questions and ask to postpone. And I also tell people, when you actually interview, do a panel interview. Make sure that somebody else has a totally different opinion and go through this. Because in the end of the day, 85% of the interview, it's quite subjective. Yeah. Even if we do the behavioral interview and ask specific questions, we are humans. Yeah. So we'll have biases. And so assuming I will judge you because I'm biased, Now saying, okay, how am I judging you? Let's stop here, explore it, and then see, can I actually refute my biases rather than confirming them?
Mhm. I want to also talk a little bit about your experience in IKEA, because you obviously you talk about some of the challenges you faced in your tenure there. But at the end of the day, when you were the global head there, the ED&I program was world renowned. It won awards, but it's a journey, right? And it's a journey that a lot of companies are now starting to undertake and starting to treat very seriously. But I think that will only be, it will only really last if they can also see tangible business benefits. Unfortunately, that's how they see it. They don't just see the moral, standing of making sure you have a D&I program. They want to see how it's going to affect their top and bottom line. And I was curious if, when you were leading that program at IKEA, firstly, I mean, how did that journey impact the actual performance of the business? How did you see the correlation or the causality between both?
It's very good question, because of course, over my 20 years there, this question came up time and again. Mm. And when we started, we decided we will actually take existing studies done by Deloitte and Touche, done by McKinsey, done by the Catalyst organization, and just use them, because what they did is longitudinal, and they did a very in-depth of many, many companies in many, many industries. And what they found is that a diverse workforce is definitely more creative, and there's more innovation in companies that are more diverse. They also did a research and studies on companies that in their management team, they have diversity on the board as well as the C-suite. And they saw, I think, something like more than 30% better revenues if you actually have diversity in your team. They also found that employees are more engaged because I can be myself. I bring myself to work. If you accept me for who I am a lot more loyal, more engaged, more motivation. I contribute more, way beyond the minimal necessary. Mm-hmm. And what they also found in terms of customers, that companies that are culturally diverse actually have more trust. Look at them and say, I see a person who resembles me. I want to shop there. They understand me and my needs. So we started with that. Then we were also asked to prove it in our own companies. And that was tough to prove, because that means that you really measure performance to the point of, are you a man or a woman, and what is your performance? Mm-hmm. And account for all the differences, because of course, if I'm a store manager in San Francisco, it is not the same like a store manager in Detroit. It's a different population and they shop differently. So we found it, for us, it was a little bit more difficult to account for all of those differences. And so we came together as a management team and decided the most important thing is that we were all born equally. And our values are humanistic. And as such, how about we start with everybody has the right to be treated equally? For me, it was also very difficult when people were telling me, why are we now promoting women? Can we prove that they are as good? For me, the answer was always, hold on. Have we ever done any studies to prove that men produce more? That all of those promotion for men, sometimes mediocre ones, were they actually for a good reason? Or are we just more comfortable with people who look like us and who fit into the business culture? So for me, it's also an issue of, why do I need to prove my capability more than the next guy if we have the same resume? And we have all of those experiences? I also think that as a woman, and a woman of color, my experiences are different from you as a man. So wouldn't you want me to come to your team and contribute? Because I have experienced things differently. and I can bring those different points of view. So we decided that is a good enough reason for us to continue the effort and to reach good results. And of course, people were engaged beyond what we wanted them. And that led to fantastic results. So it's more, how do you take it in your company? Do you continue making this justification time and again? Or do you say, the world is diverse and that is a fact, and let's speed up the way that we include all of those different people and let them shine, because it will absolutely impact us positively.
Yeah. And that IKEA example is one of many companies that have had a very strong culture of welcoming all. And but I wanted to also get your perspective when culture then in a way backfires a little bit against the whole inclusion mission by people then, even though you're hiring people of different nationalities, religion, ethnicity, whatever it may be, but then they become so entrenched in the culture of the company that anybody that seems like an outsider of a business culture is then almost not welcomed or doesn't get past the interview stage, right? So there's also this risk of companies going too much into their own culture and then not being more open-minded to people that are also thinking. Have you started to see that a little bit, that maybe people are focusing too much on organizational culture, and also what would be your recommendation to leaders, to hiring managers, to HR directors, CHROs, whoever it may be, to sort of try to mitigate that potential risk?
Yeah, that is very good, because we have encountered it ourselves, because in IKEA we had a very strong culture and we really were looking for fit, because that's what's going to strengthen the culture. And at a certain point, when we reintroduced the new recruitment strategy, we said, let's do away with fit. Let's take this word out, because fit means we continue to bring people who are exactly like us. Even if they look different, they're exactly like us. In that manner, the culture will never develop and will never expand, and people will stop developing. And it was a tough one, and I don't think we have cracked it yet. Because of course, on the one hand, you want to maintain your uniqueness as a culture, organizational culture. On the other hand, if you want to expand, so what we ended up doing, and what I think is really critical, is as you look at the purpose of the company or the vision, what are the values that are most critical that you will not compromise? And then the other values, expand them, open it up. So for example, if it is a team-oriented culture with less hierarchy, then of course you make it clear to the newcomers, it's not hierarchical, it's team-oriented, but you let go of other parts of the culture because they can then enhance you. So if something is really, really critical to who you are as a culture, then you focus on that, still keeping in mind that fit means we are excluding everybody that may help us expand. So I don't think it's an easy one.
Yeah. And I mean, just to kind of wrap up, and I want to also obviously leave the final word with you in terms of, inclusive cultures are going to be an ever more important aspect to attract top talent. We're seeing value-based decisions when people choose their jobs, and within our network, we have hiring managers, we have leaders, aspirational leaders, CIOs, CHROs. I wanted to sort of, again, ask you for your final takeaways, so that what should we do to form a more inclusive culture overall, regardless of organization or your position? What can each individual do as kind of final takeaways to have an inclusive culture?
Yeah, I think recently you can read and hear a lot about allyship, which I think is becoming more and more critical for creating an inclusive culture. It used to be a concept that they use for allies, for people of different sexual orientation. But now we talk about allyship as part of any difference. So if everybody took the role of being an ally to the people who are not included yet in the team, then we can really help amplify these colleague. So for example, if we have a meeting and one person is different, either it's the only woman or the only man, or a person with different ability or different religion, different sexual orientation, we can amplify them. We listen to their idea, and rather than ignoring it like tends to be, we amplify and highlight what they say. We also need to speak up. So when we see that people are not being treated equally, we need to say something. So it's not only speaking up for ourselves and say, I need you to treat me in a certain manner, but I also need you to treat others in the same way in order to include them. It's about asking our colleagues to lunch with us, even though we're not comfortable with them yet. So pushing ourselves out of our comfort zone will actually help us develop, but we also help the organization be more inclusive. You can invite for feedback. You can really recognize what they have done. Maybe sharing even the spotlight, because it's about, okay, I've accomplished something, but look, I've done it with those colleagues. So creating this sense of community, listening to how we communicate. What language do we use? Is it inclusive? Is it exclusive? Is it men-oriented language? Is it female-oriented language? So it's a lot about, in a meeting, I've been in some meetings that a manager would ask all of us, okay, it's Monday. Sorry, did you do something with your husband? And going on and on, having a gay person in the team, never ask them, did you do something with your husband? This guy also has a husband, but never thought, and because the manager thought he will make this person feels uncomfortable, but of course, exactly the opposite. But what if this manager takes this person aside and asks, how do you want me to include you? Because of course, in the end, there was an explosion and this person said, okay, I'm also married. Why don't you ask me? And so to prevent this, thinking about all the members of the team, how do we make them feel that they are exactly as normal as everybody else, as equal, and treat them in a fair way? And I really think we should not leave it just for leaders to do. I think it's everybody's responsibility. It's me as a colleague, me as an individual, a member of the team, and me as a team leader.
And given your 25 years plus in the D&I space, are you hopeful of the future of where we are and where we're going?
I'm very hopeful. I think the pandemic set us back.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I think we have accomplished a lot, both with gender and sexual orientation and religion. But what we've seen with the pandemic, it set us back. We see a lot of inequalities of who gets treated, because the different cultures, minorities were treated less, and then we see more death in minorities. We see inequality, and the gap widens in the genders because women were the caregivers and stayed home, and they were the majority of people who lost jobs during the pandemic. We see all of this Asian hatred after the pandemic. We see a lot of hatred for foreigners who come to my country and contaminate my country. So I think we have a setback. And I feel a sense of urgency to let it go and actually speed up the progress. We have done a lot of progress. So I know we are capable of doing a lot of progress, and letting this pandemic rest and thinking back about humanity, and not in a selfish manner, not in a nationalistic manner. I think that will do a lot to bring us forward faster, because we don't have time now. We don't have time to lose all of this progress and to continue moving in a slow pace.
Yeah. Well, Sari, I really appreciate those insights. Those are really actionable things that we all can do in individuals, as you said, regardless of whether you're a leader or an aspirational leader in the organization. you know, I agree with you. I'm also hopeful. I see more inclusive organizations. The pandemic's been tough for everyone, but hopefully with everything starting to maybe open up a little bit, as we start to fly and see each other, we'll start to remember the valuable aspects
And
there to
a lot
gain.
of organizations now are hiring
Yeah, for sure.
D&I individuals,
Yeah.
so they realize the need. So that's a very, very good sign.
Yeah. No, I said, I said, well, let's hope for more inclusive individuals, cultures, companies overall. But thanks again, once again, for your insights, Sari, and I appreciate your
You.
time.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.